A new fallout from a Senate vote on gun control. The White House is expressing new anger today after lawmakers flat out rejected key elements of the president's plan. And the bill failed yesterday while we were focused on Boston. Broader federal background checks, bans on assault weapons, and limits on magazine capacity all thrown out. The U.S. Senate said no, Democrats and Republicans. Late yesterday at Angry, President Obama was joined by some Newtown family members, and Mr. Obama lashed out at senators and the gun lobby.
I've heard folks say that having the families of victims lobby for this legislation was somehow misplaced. A prop, somebody called them. Emotional blackmail, some outlets said. Are they serious? Do we really think that thousands of families whose lives have been shattered by gun violence don't have a right to weigh in on this issue? Do we think their emotions, their loss, is not relevant to this debate? So all in all, this was a pretty shameful day for Washington.
Joining me now, Alan Combs, who's hosted the Alan Combs Show, and Ben Ferguson, who's hosted the Ben Ferguson Show through the Icon Radio Network. And the president went on to accuse the NRA of willfully lying in order to stop this bill from getting through. I'm going to get to that in 1 second, but let me start with his position on the Newtown families, because the president seemed to be defending charges that he was using them as a prop. And I want to point out to the viewers, the Newtown families are not unanimous on gun control. I mean, we had a heartfelt interview with a beautiful father who lost his little boy, and he does not want any more gun control in the wake of Newtown. Most of the families do, but not all. In any event, I want to start with you on this, Alan, because the president lost. I mean, he lost on every score. He didn't even get the background checks, which had been lightened to the point that they were being mocked by some as completely feckless. They couldn't even get that through.
I think the American people lost, and the president knew it would be a loss going in. They knew they didn't have the votes. So here's a case of the president standing up for what he really believes is the right thing to do, even knowing going in before yesterday they didn't have the votes. And sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even if you know the votes aren't there. And sometimes you got to stand up for what's right, even if you're facing a primary, like both Democrats and Republicans did, all of whom who voted wrong on this, who voted no, are cowardly, because they're too worried about their political future than they are about what they really should do, what's right for the families of America.
As we listened to the president yesterday, Ben, it seemed very clear who he thought was to blame for the defeat of these measures. Here is the president talking about the NRA. Listen.
But instead of supporting this compromise, the gun lobby and its allies willfully lied about the bill. They claimed that it would create some sort of big brother gun registry, even though the bill did the opposite. This legislation, in fact, outlawed any registry. Plain and simple, right there in the text. But that didn't matter.
Can you speak to that charge?
I think the president has been obsessed with the NRA the entire debate here. And the reason why he lost yesterday is because...
Wait, but let me just stop you. Can you speak to that specific charge, the president saying that the NRA and its allies willfully lied by claiming that this background check system and this bill would create some sort of big brother gun registry?
I don't think they lied. I think that they said and used quotes from senators and congressmen who openly said that we should have high taxes and we should have a register of guns, and this was the way they felt that was the first step to do that. And I think they had reason to believe that because there were on-the-record Congress and senators that were Democrats that said that's what they wanted, and that's exactly what the NRA did say. But I think the president, they missed the boat on this, and they let down the families of Newtown. And the way they did it was they went for a piece of legislation that would not have affected a school shooting. This school shooting, if this bill would have been in effect, would not have had any impact on that school shooting. And so that's where the president lost. When Dianne Feinstein came out and she said, I've got a bill that's been in my desk drawer for years, as she put it. That's why they lost, because they didn't write a bill that was anything but propaganda for anti-gun. If they would have written a bill that would have helped keep kids safe at schools, the president probably could have had a bipartisan victory.
Really?
But they were so obsessed with being anti-gun.
Really, Alan? Listen, I'm not taking a position on this one way or the other, but the advocates of the bill said limit the magazine clips that you can have. That you limit it from 30 down to 10, and in some instances wanted guns that were already out there, certain assault weapons, to be banned. That didn't have bipartisan support, and it got even fewer votes than the less impactful measures, because there was no way they were going to get agreement on those things.
If they couldn't even get agreement on this very weak bill, and the ACLU, by the way, which does not want to have registration, even said, because the ACLU is actually on the conservative side of this issue in terms of where the conservatives stand.
They don't like Big Brother.
They don't want, it's a privacy issue, correct. And they said that this would not lead to registration. The NRA called it legislation. They willfully did lie. And they also did robocalls to the families of Newtown and talked about how they would be disarming the American people. That's also a lie.
I asked Wayne LaPierre about that. I did ask him when he came on. He said they did general robocalls in Connecticut in the wake of Newtown because they were pushing for tighter gun regs.
But they said disarm. I heard the robocall.
But I'm just pointing. I just want to say that I asked him about that because it seemed like a rather insensitive thing to do, and his response was, "We just did it throughout the state of Connecticut on the gun legislation that was, you
okay, but my point is they said disarm, and nobody's disarming. They were wrong.
Go ahead,
Ben. Megyn, the core of this issue is the president was so angry yesterday, and he was so frustrated with Congress. And the reason why, again, he lost this issue is because this was an obsession with gun control and not an obsession with actually fixing a problem with mental health or protecting kids in schools. And if he would have done that, that's where he could have had bipartisan support. But when you only go after background checks and you only go after guns, which, again, the background checks would have had no bearing on the outcome of any of these shootings we've had recently, that's where you lose people in Congress, and that's why they walked away from the president, including people in his own party. They walked away from
that is just true. What that last statement is just a truism. I mean, the background checks that were being proposed would not have prevented anything from happening in Newtown.
That's true. I don't think
it was another issue that they thought they could make progress on. But I want to ask you about this, Alan. In the wake of this, we heard the president's anger, and I understand he feels strongly about this, but so do, the people on the other side. Mm-hmm. And David Axelrod tweeted out the following: "No senator who healed today on the NRA's command should have the gall to issue mournful statements the next time gun violence strikes." Now, this suggests if you are opposed to the president's measures, like that Newtown father who came on this program, you have no right to express mourning in the wake of future gun violence.
Well, I don't agree. Of course, she has a right, and I don't agree with that. But let's face it, the polls do show that 90% of Americans, including about 85% of gun owners, really wanted at least the background check. And even this Manchin bill, this Toomey Manchin bill, had many loopholes in it, not calling for registration. You could still sell to friends and family. So it didn't really, in my view, do a good enough job in terms of background checks, but it did something. It was a weak bill. They couldn't even pass that because the NRA threatened to put people on lists. And the NRA threatened these senators.
And last question, because the president says this effort is not over. Steve Hayes was on our air earlier saying it's over. What do you think?
I think it's totally over. I think the president used a lot of political capital. He made a lot of enemies on this issue, and he didn't deal with the core of the issues with Newtown, and so people are not listening to him right now. He went all in with an agenda, a political agenda, instead of actually trying to do what politicians are supposed to try to do, which is fix a problem when there's an issue. He did not address the issue. He's lost, and I'm sorry, he lost for everyone.
We'll focus now on mental health. Interestingly, Steve Hayes made another point, which was he believed that folks just didn't generally believe these promises of it'll be limited and it won't grow because they believe, he said, some folks believe the president less these days in the wake of Obamacare turning into something other than what